a pattern of that study in just a moment. Uh, there are very few days that I go through that I don't forget something. And last Sunday I forgot the announcements, so I will read last week's announcements. Oh, no. Uh, the announcements for today are as follows. We've got an elders and deacons meeting at 4 o'clock this afternoon. This is the day for evangelism card writing team 1. Be after afternoon this afternoon after evening services in the library. Central will be hosting the summer youth series on Tuesday, July the 16th at 7 o'clock. Need everybody that can be available to help serve the youth that will be attending that. Of course, we're still in the midst of our Wednesday evening Central Summer Series. Still need a volunteer to host the Spkr on August the 7th for the evening meal. 2024 Ladies' Day coming up in a couple of months on Saturday, September the 28th. Volunteers are needed to help with some of the committees. There are sign-up sheets on the bulletin board if you're available for that. Our McCracken County Fair outreach was highly successful this last time, and there's another one coming up. Need volunteers to help with that starting on Tuesday, July the 23rd, running through Saturday the 27th. Again, there's a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board if you're available for that. There are a number of reasons why people don't try to attempt a formal class study of the book of Proverbs, and one of them is because the material is so concentrated and so dense. You know, you could take 4 or 5 proverbs, and you could spend a quarter on just those if you were inclined to. And it gets a little overwhelming even to just read, to go through because of the intensity, because of the concentration of the type of material Proverbs is. You'll get far more out of the book of Proverbs by doing as I suggested a week or so ago, of just taking one proverb and letting that be your proverb at least of the day, if not for the week, and focusing on it and not just reading it, of course, because that can be done very briefly in just a matter of seconds, but actually thinking about it and mulling it over, because that's the way Proverbs are really intended to be dealt with. This is heavy stuff. It appears to be lighter than it is a lot of times, because Proverbs are what would have been called in my boyhood era common sense. And so the common sense just kind of jumps out at you. You say, well, yeah, or I guess maybe a little more modern expression, duh. But still, and forgive me if I don't know what comes after duh. I did good to get that far. But the idea is something that really needs to have thought put into it and time spent with it. I never intended to try to wow you with any great brilliance on the book of Proverbs. I don't have it in me, for one thing, and for another, it's just impossible to do in a quarter anyway, even if you were brilliant. My chief goal was to reacquaint you with a book that most of us tend not to spend very much time on, and we would do well to spend more time with it. That's probably true, unfortunately, of all 66 of those books. But we do at least spend more time on Acts, maybe, than we do Proverbs. And how does the verse go? All Scripture is inspired of God. What's that first word again? I can't remember. Is it all? It's something like this. The 3-letter word. All is profitable for doctrine, reproof, instruction, correction, instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfectly equipped to deal with not only the scriptures, but everyday living. That's a very crude, rough paraphrase, but I think it gets at the heart of the matter. So Proverbs is way beyond our time or my ability to convey some brilliant new insight into the book. We're not trying to go there. I did spend a lot of time on the very first chapter or two because the first 10 chapters are a prologue to the whole book. And I wanted you to sort of at least get the flavor of that. But we'd be doing an injustice, even in a very cursory survey like we're doing, to the book of Proverbs if we didn't get down to some specific proverbs and at least take a look at them. Can't spend any time on these one by one to amount to anything, but we can at least call attention to some specifically. I've given you the list of some topics that we'll try to look at as time allows so that we can have some concept of what the book is about. But see, ours is not a philosophical study. There is a side of me that would be happy to live the life of a monk. You know, far removed from the everyday, mundane, ugly sides of life and just open my scrolls and read from my scrolls and think about that. That's nice, but that's not what we're about. We're supposed to be out there in the world, living for God, trying to glorify Him, and that's the point of what we're doing. So first we have to know what to do, and sadly, in my experience, that's the easiest part. The hard part is doing what you know. And you don't have to know a whole lot before that becomes really difficult. Yeah, I know it's supposed to be easy, but I'm not sure I find any place in the scriptures where it says it is easy. Yeah, I know about the burden being light and easy. I get that. But I also know in everyday living, Christianity is not all that acceptable. And we're finding out a reality that we're just getting smacked in the face with over the last couple of decades, that now it's come home to roost in our world. So Proverbs is designed to help get us through that. Turn, if you will, please, to chapter 29. I am going backwards in this. And I started that out last time, and I'm going to continue with that. And if there's a particular proverb that speaks to me as something I find that could be useful for all of us, I'm going to pick some of these out in isolation, and I may be doing very little more than just reading it. But at least it will remind you that it's there, and hopefully the idea is that you will study on your own, not just while we're doing this study, but from time to time you'll look at Proverbs with a different viewpoint, through fresh eyes, and let it help you in your everyday living with the common sense that's also inspired. In chapter 29, look at verse 27, the very last verse in that chapter. There are 2 or 3 verses on this theme that, if we have time for, we're going to look at today as a part of our study. This is a really good example of Hebrew poetry construction that we've mentioned several times already. The antithesis concept of shooting an idea this way, you've seen me do this number now, and then going back in the other direction, or going side by side like railroad tracks, parallel to one another, and either stating something that's very, very similar or like what the first phrase says, or something similar to that. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous. That's just pretty much self-explanatory. Yeah. Righteous people hate to see injustice. That's ingrained in us from the time we're little kids. How many times have you heard a little child say, "But that's not fair. And oftentimes it isn't. And then there comes back the adult response. Yeah, I know it. Life's not fair. And that's not a smart aleck put down. That's a reality. Life is not fair. But sometimes we don't even know what fair is. I used to tell kids when I taught in the secular world, if you think I'm going to teach this class and treat everyone in this room the same all the time, you couldn't be more wrong. That's not fair. Huh? What's fair is to teach people and then treat them the same that are in the same situation. A common example in that secular world would be, okay, someone misbehaves and I say, maybe I don't even say anything. Maybe I just do my first level. I just glance at them so they know. You know, you need to clean up. I know you need to clean up, but there's no need to say anything. And somebody else, I might give 5,633 days of detention. That ain't fair, man. Did the same thing. But the first one, it's my first time to ever have to correct it. The other one has gone over and over and over and over and violated and violated and violated. Even in our legal system, we have a term for that sort of thing. Persistent felon. Someone who is, this isn't like their first mess up. They're chronic at this. So we oftentimes don't even have a very good concept of what fair is and what justice is. We better kind of get a good notion, though, because God is just. It's one of His qualities. I have no business trying to teach you about God's justice, but I will just say part of the reason why God sent His Son to earth to die for people like me is because He has this inherent sense of justice that must be satisfied. You don't make plea deals with God. It's got to be right. And because of that, that justice, if wrong is done, there must be a penalty or some way or another that must be made right. And it's part of satisfying God's sense of justice that all this was necessary. We sometimes forget about that aspect of God. It's part of His very nature. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous. But for those of you who mark, I'd suggest going through the book of Proverbs and underlining the word but over and over and over. But the one whose way is straight is an abomination to the wicked. Huh? Yeah. Doing right, trying to do right, will get you in trouble with a lot of people. Get used to it. Our Savior pointed us to us with this very concept and warned us about it. He said, if they hated me, they're not exactly going to want to jump up and hug your neck unless it's like this. So don't expect to be treated nicer than they treated me. Jesus tells us that. He warns us about that. Good people are not just disagreed with oftentimes. Sometimes they are hated. They are despised. The ancient writer says this is a trait that's almost as old as humanity. that one proverb is enough to chew on for a lifetime. So don't be offended if bad people treat you bad. In fact, when you stand up here or anywhere and you're trying to teach, things run through your mind all the time. That's why sometimes scrambled words come out of my mouth. But I'm thinking about an instance where basically one of the apostles made the comment that he was just thrilled to death that basically bad people were giving him a hard way to go because it was a testimony to the fact that he was doing right and that God was being glorified. Right now, I need my Google and a concordance to tell you where that comes from, but just for right now, please take my word for it. Long time on that one, but it's a very key proverb for everyday living. Let's look at chapter 28, a couple of verses there. One I'd like for us to take a look at is verse 27. Here's a dilemma that I'll bet most of you in here have faced before. Whoever gives to the poor will not want. Now that's a good one just to stop right there on. Okay. God promises us a certain level of provision. We need to make sure new Christians understand that they are not going into nirvana or heaven when they become a Christian. We don't do a real good job of that, I'm afraid. If we say nothing, they at least even, and sometimes that's usually what we do say about, okay, how this is going to go forward. They just assume that, okay, I'm right with God, so God's going to take care of me. That's true. But it does not mean trouble's going to go away. We also understand that God will provide for us in a material way up to a certain point. But you can be a very, and I will use it sort of in a secular way, but also in a scriptural way. You can be a very saintly person, and you can have a very rough life. There are more than 10 people that I can name that have died trying to do the right thing. Just try looking at a list of Bible translators sometimes. But whoever gives to the poor will not want. If you are generous, that is a good quality in God's sight, and also, of course, in the general idea of mankind. There's some people that would say, well, you're a sucker for giving your stuff away. Just, why don't you do something nice for yourself? But most people, this first part is, most of us in here, we don't have a whole lot of trouble with that. There's the magic word but again. He who hides his eyes will get many a curse. Here is the troublesome part for me. You're going along the road, you're walking along the street. Here's a guy with a sign. Now, I don't have any trouble moving right on past them if they're just saying, gimme. If they have on that sign, willing to work, that kind of pokes at me just a little bit. I don't really like passing people up that are asking for a handout, but I do it more and more. I'm not suggesting what your pattern ought to be. I'm suggesting that this is one of those things that's not as cut and dried as we sometimes would like for it to be. I mentioned this business of drawing lines before. Where do you draw the line on some things? Where do you draw the line on trying to determine, should I be the Good Samaritan in this case? There was a time when I would pull over on the side of the road Obviously, this is a while back. And if someone appeared to be broken down or something, not because I had any great automobile skills, as you all know, but I could at least offer some kind of assistance or offer to volunteer to go get somebody that had some sense about mechanics. Then I morphed into pulling well down the road past them and walking within shouting range and saying, "Do you need any help?" And now I'm pretty much to the stage where I just say, okay, everybody's got a cell phone. Where do you draw the lines on stuff like this? I'm not real comfortable with the second part of this because I'd like for it just to give you a definite answer. I like cut and dried, black and white, and a lot of life is gray. If you think it's all black and white, I'm sorry for you. It isn't. Whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes will get many a curse. If I walk away from that guy who has the sign, "Gimme," and he starts cussing me out, I at least feel vindicated. You know, but I'm not so sure whether I'm vindicated in God's sight or not. Sometimes wisdom does not always give us clear answers to things. Look at verse 5. Here's another one on justice. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. Of course, that's hyperbole. There are very few things that we understand completely. I don't know if I'm really an expert on anything, but if I have strength of knowledge in some areas, I can quickly tell you that I don't understand it completely. That just doesn't work. But the basic truth is still there. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. Our character affects the way we see things. It affects our perception. That's why it's really important to make sure you, as best you can, as much as it's within your control, that you develop the right kind of character, because the way you see everything in the world is based primarily on that character. All those experiences that have gone into you, that the input is definitely going to affect the perception of it. It's just the way that is, unfortunately. Especially when people don't really have really good input anyway, in some cases. Evil men do not understand justice. They don't understand it. It doesn't say they hate it. It's just something they don't even get. But those who seek the Lord understand it completely. It's second nature, would be the way I would paraphrase that. Yeah. It's just their natural way of looking at things. Let's look at chapter 27. Try number 15. A continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind or to grasp oil in one's right hand. I'll go to the latter part of that verse. First of all, with a primary observation. Solomon ought to know, right? You know, if anybody ought to know, he ought to be the expert on that. Have you ever tried to hold oil in your hand? There have been times when I've done things like maybe changing the oil in a mower. Yeah, I could go that level, guys. I could manage that one. And oil would get in my hand, and it just pours off. Will it stop the wind as it comes through the door and towards me? It's basically saying it's impossible. And a continual dripping. If you've ever had a drip of any kind in your house, you get it. Whether it's a leaky ceiling from a bad shingle, or even just a dripping faucet that's leaking. Or the toilet, as we say, runs, And we walk in there to wash our hands and there it goes again. And we think, okay, I need to call a plumber, or guys that have at least my level of expertise say I probably ought to get a new flapper for the thing or something like that. Some things seem to be uncontrollable. Let's take a look at verse 7. One who is full loathes honey, but the one who is hungry, everything bitter is sweet. There are people who can scarcely understand both parts of this because some of it is something that is beyond their experience. But for most of us in here, we can understand both parts. One who is full loathes honey. It's not talking about honey, by the way, of course. Proverbs don't work that way. It's basically saying that when you got everything, and don't just apply to food, when you've got plenty, then you're just full up of whatever it is. And you don't want any more. You can apply it to food if you want to, because that illustrates the point real well, and I think that's why the writer of this verse did that. At the end of a good meal, you really don't want any more. That's not the time for somebody to give you an invitation, let's go eat at your favorite restaurant. You're done. But the one who is hungry, even stuff that's bitter tastes good. We're having a lot of hot weather. Guys like me don't get out in it very much. But if I have been thirsty, I might rather have a cool glass of water, or maybe lemonade, or that peach tea. But I'll just take plain old lukewarm water to help satisfy my thirst. Even that tastes pretty good. What's the core of this? Our appreciation of something is often a result of our perspective. How much we appreciate anything has to do with the situation we're in and the perspective that we have on it. My cable went out. My life is over. Somebody else gets pretty decent shortwave reception on the village radio, and they're thrilled to death that they get that. Hey, we can hear what's going on in the outside world. It's all a matter of perspective. Maybe that's also a little indication of how appreciative we ought to be for what we have. Then, like this one that's hungry, even if it doesn't taste so good. I'm not a bean eater. I do not care for beans. Well, I like jelly beans. Uh, but generally speaking, I don't care much for beans. But if I were a hungry person, I might be called upon to eat a bean or two. All perspective, isn't it? Let's take a look at chapter 26. There is a whole lot more in these chapters than I'm doing. You do know that, of course, but we're trying to survey, remember? And I'm not even going to get done with the survey part of what I want to get done today. Look at chapter 26 with me, please, and let's look at verse 18. Like a madman who throws firebrands. That's like one of these torches, and it's lit and stuff, and you've seen like in movies or TV, and they toss it like into a cave like old time explorers in Kentucky caves used to do to light up an area for a moment so they could see what's in there. That's a firebrand. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I'm only joking. What that reminded me of, if I were going to do a modern version of this, are the goofuses on airplanes in the earlier days of when we began to have so many restrictions and security precautions. And they'd make some comment about having a gun or a bomb, and the security people would be all over, joking. Such a man has no sense. There are some things you don't joke about. If you don't have enough sense to know what is going to be humorous in that situation and what's going to get you in a world of trouble, you're going to stay in a world of trouble. If I didn't say it in the first lesson, it occurs to me it's about time to say it again. When I say you, the you means me. I'm not telling you that you're already doing this and that you're in a mess and you need to clean your act up. Maybe I could just say the Southern term, y'all. All of us. We need to be really careful about how we use our mouth in so many ways, and this is one of them. Look at verse right before it, verse 17. I can't help but smile when I look at this. It's crazy. It's just crazy. But I've seen people, I'm sorry, the word is dumb. The word is just dumb. I've seen people go up to a strange dog and pull this stunt. It never turns out well. I've never seen them just wag their tail. Whoever meddles in a quarrel, not his own, is like one who takes a passing dog, one he doesn't even know about, not familiar with at all, by the ears. I've had a lot of dogs over my lifetime. I really like dogs. Don't have one now. But I've had everything from little bitty dogs like poodles to big German shepherds, from goofy cocker spaniels to boxers, different temperaments and all of that. But dogs' ears are sensitive for those who are not dog owners. That's one of the least likely parts of them you ought to be getting a hold of. Maybe if you know them, you might consider scratching behind their ears and they might like that. But going up, we have dogs all over our neighborhood. And I'm friends with most of them. A lot of them I know by name. But I would never walk up to a strange dog because I got more sense than you do too. I don't even try to touch a dog that I haven't really been introduced to. I'll kneel down maybe. We're not talking about dogs here, by the way. You know, there's a bigger lesson than just dogs. And slowly let them come up to me and get accustomed to me. And then is a time to maybe make sure they can see my hands well. Some things need to be moved into slowly. It's just, you wouldn't do that. Now, okay, that's an illustration of a more serious problem. The serious problem is meddling. If it ain't none of your business, stay out of it. Bad grammar blunt message. You got enough to tend to on your own, Ron. Keep your nose out of other people's business unless they ask you for help. So we need to think about that. Verse 7. Like a lame man's legs, which hang useless, is a proverb in the mouth of fools. Imagine the image. I'm thinking of a guy sitting on a cot, and his legs are dangling over the edge of the cot. They're atrophied. He has no feeling in them. He has no strength in them. He can't walk. They're just there. They're just appendages to pull pants legs up over. In virtually every way, his legs are useless. That's how worthless it is to provide a proverb to a man with no sense. Obviously, I think we've got more sense, or we wouldn't be studying the book of Proverbs. But there are some people that have no sense. Otherwise, Proverbs wouldn't exist. To help teach them and help the rest of us hone our good sense to a better level. Of course, there will always be the hard-headed that will turn their minds off. They don't want to hear it. Of course there are. They're wise in their own ways, and they get to reap the benefits of that. But we should do better. Look at chapter 25, verse 20. Just very plain, practical advice. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda. Now, you may or may not understand the chemical allusion here, but I'm sure all of us can get the point by looking at that particular one. We may not understand the reaction that's provided here in this illustration, but we understand that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to start undressing in the cold. Matter of fact, if you take that to the extreme, I'm interested in reading about a lot of things, but one is I like to read about explorers, and that includes polar explorers. And one of the phenomenon of people that suffer hypothermia is that they start taking their clothes off. They get, as they perceive it, hot. Obviously, they are passing a major milestone towards death when that occurs. Somebody has just lost a loved one. Let's go over and play our guitar for them. Sing pretty songs. And we're not talking about, one of the things that came to mind, because I'm always trying to look at the flip side of stuff, and maybe some of you have already done that too, and maybe you're thinking about David and Saul. Sometimes David could calm Saul's rage down by singing to him and playing for him. We're not talking about that sort of thing. We're talking about I've lost the expression now, so you just kind of fill it in for me. Like a Mexican fiesta, where everybody's partying and, you got a mariachi band going and stuff. That's out of place. It's not helping. It's making things worse. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Well put. If you are happy, clap your hands, Leah reminds us. And if you're unhappy about the schedule, do this. Uh, um, let's see if we can slip one more in and work our way through 25. Let's look at verse 9. Again, a common sense, practical thing. Argue your case with your neighbor himself. Do not reveal another's secret, lest he who hears you bring shame upon you and your ill repute have no end. This is something that is against the nature of many people. And those of us that basically have this nature are sometimes accused of being harsh and blunt. But the scriptures teach both in the Old and the New Testament. If you have an issue with somebody, go to them. Don't go tell the world. Go to the person. But I don't want to. Then shut up. If you have an issue with your neighbor, this proverb tells us we need to talk to him. Argue your case with your neighbor himself. And do not reveal another's secret. We need to be trustworthy. There are grown-ups in here of many decades, and there are younger people. Do a lot of times. How important it is to have credibility. Credibility is one of the most valuable assets you can have. Even your enemies respect it. Credibility matters. So you can't have credibility if you're blabbing everything you know. You just can't. We'll stop. I got a warning signal.